So, hello everyone. My name is Taku Kumabe, and thank you for joining me today on the Stay Inspired series. I am a freelance photographer here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and a Nikon ambassador for Canada. And today I would like to talk to you a little bit about the most versatile Z. That's what I like to call this. And essentially, when Nikon contacted me to try out the pre-production copy of the Z9, I was so excited because I had heard rumors about what this camera was capable of doing, and it was just amazing to be able to hold it in my hands finally at this point. So I had the initial impression, as I think a lot of people did through my readings, that the Z9 was actually a replacement for Nikon's D6 DSLR full frame camera. And that camera is geared a lot towards sports photographers and maybe wildlife or photojournalists as well. So a lot of the impressions coming out of the Z9, people were thinking that it was actually geared a lot towards the sports photographers and nobody else. I soon realized after getting the camera that it is capable of a lot more than that. And in fact, it is so versatile that so many other people and other genres of photography will be able to use it with ease. So I thought I tried to do something a little bit differently in this presentation, and focus on the features that the Z9 has inside the camera itself. And by doing that, I hope I'll be able to show some sort of creativity with the versatility of the camera, and pretty much the sky's the limit in terms of what you can do once you learn to harness the power that this camera actually has. So, for instance, this opening image here is actually of an astrophotography image of the Milky Way. And I started off with this because the first thing I did with the Z9 when I got it was I actually drove up to Algonquin Park in Northern Ontario, and I started to do some astrophotography. So I will share some of that with you here as well. And so to begin, I'll just share a little bit more about me again. I am a freelance photographer here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I focus a lot on events and festivals in the city, editorial portraitures, and as well nature and landscape. If you are following me on Instagram, thank you very much for that. I post a lot of my nature and landscapes on Instagram, so that's what many of you will probably know me by. And this presentation is probably geared a little bit more heavily towards nature and landscape than it is to events or portraitures, since there are many features that lends itself to that genre. So to begin, for those who are not familiar, the Nikon Z9 is a full-frame 45 megapixel mirrorless body with an integrated grip. So that means if you flip the camera from landscape to portrait mode, there's a grip on the right hand side, so you no longer need to reposition your hand when you're doing so. Physically, the Z9 is to a D6 DSLR camera as the Z7 was to the D800 series of cameras. So just like the Z7 was just a little bit smaller than the D800 series DSLRs, the Z9 is just a little smaller than the D6 DSLR cameras. In terms of ergonomics and grips, you will feel right at home with a Nikon grip. It's so comfortable, and it's just that good familiar feeling that you get when you're holding that Nikon camera. And it's just something that I enjoy holding in my hands for extended periods of time. The vertical grip is very comfortable, and it's just so easy to use. The buttons on there are just placed in the exact right position so that your fingers can reach it without any problems. Internally, there's no more mechanical shutter, and what I mean by that is basically the shutter mechanism that opens and closes in front of the sensor in a camera. They've basically done away with that because the sensor readout speed is so fast now in this camera that they no longer need the shutter to be able to open and close to make a picture. The sensor, there's also a sensor covering, I guess I call it a mechanism, but it could be a shutter, so to speak. It basically covers the sensor when you take off the lens so that no dust or debris can get or attach itself onto the sensor. So that is a very welcome addition to the Z series camera. Moving on to the dials are now back to rubber, which I really like, and so thank you so much for doing that. To me, it just feels so much better when you're changing the settings on the dials. It's so much easier and quicker, and it's actually a lot better on the fingers when you keep twisting the dials so often like that. So those are very similar feels to the D800 series cameras, as well as the D6 cameras. The battery life is brand new. The battery itself is brand new for the Z9, different from the D6, but it is still compatible with the D6 and D5 batteries. But you do get a lot more juice out of the new Z9 battery. I did a full night of long exposures, time lapses, and photos. And at the end of the night, only one bar was missing out of my screen, so that was actually very impressive. I was quite surprised by that fact. Moving on to the viewfinder now. This is actually pretty funny. There's a story here where I mentioned before, as the first thing that I did when I got the Z9 was I drove up to Algonquin Park. And so one of the first things that I did when I really started to use the camera was to actually use it at night. And when I looked through the viewfinder at night, I was just totally blown away because everything was so clear. Everything, I could identify things at night. I guess the viewfinder was a lot brighter, crisper, and there was just no noise that I often see in the shadow areas with my viewfinder on the Z7 II. So I compared the two because I brought my Z7 II and the Z9 together, and it was just literally night and day in terms of what I was looking at. In this picture, you can actually see the stars and the Milky Way in the center. If I looked at the stars with the Z9, the brighter shining stars I can actually see within the viewfinder, and I could actually pinpoint that and focus right on there, right within the viewfinder itself. And I get none of that noisy, staticky things that I may have gotten with the Z7 II viewfinder. I mentioned this to Nikon, and they actually told me that the Z9 specs for the viewfinder are actually very similar to that of the Z7 II. I was not expecting that, but they mentioned that internally there is so many things different going on in the Z9 that the performance of the viewfinder actually improves just that much because of that. So again, reduced noisy shadow areas, crisp, brighter, and just overall better. And a lot of people beforehand, they wanted to basically do away with some of the display settings within their viewfinder. So you'll be happy to know that there are now various options for you to display and or hide either the top, side, or bottom information displays. You have several choices in how to go about doing that, so you'll be happy about that. And as mentioned, improved low light focusing compared to the Z7 II. I did notice that in the dark, I was able to actually gain focus on my Z9, whereas the Z7 II did have to hunt a little bit for that same focus point. So very impressed overall with the viewfinder itself. Not to mention, it is a blackout viewfinder, so when you're doing burst mode, you will actually see the actual the live feed of your viewfinder still while you're actually taking the burst mode. So, workflow. So, what I mean by workflow is basically the little details that are inside the camera that allow professionals to work out in the field with a little bit more ease. And these features may not necessarily be, the standout ones that many people talk about, but they are back in the Z9 camera. So very similar to the D6 in terms of these functionality and features. You now have a microphone in the back so you can record short notes for your individual files. You have full network connectivity with LAN, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, so you can actually connect directly to an FTP server and upload your files directly through that. Very useful if your client or your agency needs that basic instantaneous upload of your photos as you take them. The camera now has a built-in global navigation satellite system, which is an improved network system than GPS. Basically, it does use 4 different satellite systems for more accuracy and redundancy. In the front of the Z9, we have the 10-pin connector, which is back, which a lot of people use for various 10-pin accessories like the shutter release system. USB charging is also available. You can actually run the camera off a USB pack if you have one and connect it to the camera. Many of the buttons are all customizable to your needs, and even there is, I believe, a button on the vertical grip that you can actually customize to your needs, which I found very helpful if you wanted to do like video release on the horizontal on your vertical grip. The camera itself has dual card slots, XQD and CF Express. And you do need these. These are very beneficial because the videos that I took out of them, these file sizes are rather large. Moving on to the autofocus system, which many people like to talk about. Excellent in the Z9. Many different ones from the Z7 IIs and the Z6 IIs. Wide area, dynamic area, those two are available on the Z6 and 7, but we now have 3 different sizes, small, medium, and large for each of them. Very helpful. 3D tracking, also new, very helpful as well in case the subject is moving back and forth from the camera itself. And we now have 3 different detection modes: car, animal, and people. And also auto detection mode, which is one of the things that I was actually asking for from the Z7 II as well. So thank you so much for including that. That is basically you let the camera decide if you're trying to focus on a car, animal, or person in your frame. And all of those detection points, they work within the wide area focus modes as well as the full screen of your viewfinder. So very helpful, very advanced, and it works ever so smoothly on the Z9 from my experience. And again, pinpoint and single point are also there as well. So just to demonstrate a little bit, I saw this while I was walking in Algonquin Park. I saw this little red squirrel basically running around the ground looking for food. It finally found an acorn, started running up the tree. I was basically tracking it all over. I had the 500 millimeter lens on, so as I was tracking it, it actually stopped on a branch. But the branch itself was covered with so many other branches and leaves and leaves in front of it. So I actually shifted a little bit so I can get a little bit of a space in between the branch and the leaves. And the camera was able to pinpoint its eye directly on its eye, even though I was maybe about 20 feet away on the ground and he was actually up high on the branch. So very impressive with that. And if you zoom in at 100%, you can tell that the eye is super crisp and sharp as he was enjoying his acorn. A quick detour now from the forest and onto the road. I wanted to test out the speed of the autofocus or the autofocus ability. So I asked one of my cyclist friends to cycle in front of me. And so during this time, he was going about probably 20-30 kilometers an hour at some points. And on the left side here, basically I had my camera stationary and I had him running along the roadway from the left to the right. The camera actually focused on his face and his eyeball. It was tracking it all the way through, even though he was wearing glasses, cycling glasses. It was actually able to pick up where his eye was, and it focused all the way through the frame. And when I shot the picture, I had a flash go by on the rear curtain side, so it managed to get a little bit of the I managed to illustrate a little bit of the speed that he was going through. And if you zoom in a little bit closer, you'll be able to see that his face and eye are actually crisp and right on focus. Similarly, on the right hand side, this time I was actually moving my camera from left to right as he was cycling past towards me. And again, I shot with a flash in rear curtain so that I could freeze that moment and have a little bit of that blur trailing behind him. Again, the focus was smack on, right on his face and eyeball, no issues there. Very impressed with this as well. And just as quickly as me doing this, I changed my lens to the 100mm or 105mm macro lens just to do a quick portrait because that lighting was so nice that evening with shining from the right. It was a beautiful night, so I just quickly had him pose in front of the on his bike, and just like that, we did a little portrait session out in the field there, impromptu session right there, and it was terrific. The camera pretty much handled anything that we gave it at that point. Moving on back into the not the forest, a lake now as I was kayaking. I was kayaking through this lake full of lily pads, and I didn't actually notice this at first, but I saw something moving out in the far distance. And when I looked closer, I noticed that it was actually a family of ducks. And it was really hard to see because I was probably maybe about 30-40 feet away from these ducks. And these ducks were actually the same colors as some of the lily pads and the stuff floating on top of the lake. So I took the Z9, used I believe it was a wide area focus, and it actually tracked the eyeball of the parent duck in the front on the left hand side there. And it tracked the eyeball as it was moving along the lake side there. I was super impressed with that. Zoom in a little bit closer, you'll see that everything is in focus. All the little baby ducks are happily swimming along, and behind the mother duck there who are in focus. So very impressive. I'm super happy that it managed to grab that despite it being camouflaged within the field itself. So here I have a heron just flying out of the water. I managed to catch it just as it was jumping. And I was in my kayak at this point, probably about 30 feet away. And I saw that he was just about to fly away from the water, so I quickly got the Z9, and I managed to get him pinpoint sharp as he was flying out of the water. Now I made a quick video of this, maybe about 1 second long, and of him flying out of the water. So let's take a look at that. So there we have it. So it is a quick video, like I mentioned. Maybe we can see it again. But basically, he was flapping out of the lake, and I know for a fact that every single frame of this was super sharp, pinpoint right to his eyeball and his wing and feathers. And how do I know this? Well, it's because I did not shoot this in video mode, but rather in 20 frames a second raw mode. So that's 8,256 by 5,504 pixels of raw files at 20 frames per second, which is incredibly quick. And it just blew me away when I just basically held the shutter down and it was just firing away. Again, this was in silent mode, so not to scare the heron, but basically it was just firing away so many frames a second, and I managed to catch him flying out of the water. So this is one of the stills coming out there. As I mentioned, this was the 70 to 200 at about maybe 30 feet away, 30, 40 feet away. So he was a little bit in the distance there. So I cropped in, or I zoomed in a little bit closer, so that he is more centered in the screen there, and we can actually see his eyeball and the details in his feathers. And I did that for so many of the frames that I managed to capture within that within the burst mode. So I must have pressed this more than once at this time, since this was about 20 to I believe 26 frames here in all, where I actually managed to capture him going right away. So I got all these individual frames, and then I stitched them together into a video to make that 1 second video that I showed you. So super crisp heron. I loved it, and very impressive at that. So just as fast as I was doing that, I'm now switching over to on land, where I decided to pick up my 105 micro lens and do some macro photography. Again, just as easily, it focuses super sharp on these leaves. On the left hand side, you have the autumn foliage here. Crisp details of the leaves itself with a beautiful bouquet in the back. Again, on the right hand side, I saw a dragonfly flying around, landed on the flower there, so I focused without issue so quickly right there. It managed to focus right on the eye and the body there with ease. And in this picture here with the heron, you can see that it's actually a little bit hazy and not too clear, but that's because I was actually hiding behind a lot of blades of grass, like you see on the back of the heron there. And I must have been at this point about 40 feet away, again with the 500 f lens. The camera was actually able to pick up the eyeball and his head right through the grass blades. Super impressed with that, and the fact that it had no issues tracking the heron as it was walking about in this marshland area. Super sharp. So picture control. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about this because it's not a new feature inside the Z9. It is, in fact, in many of the Z cameras, and as well as the D800s series cameras and the D6. But I feel like it's a very underutilized feature, so that I thought I would actually put a little bit segment in here about it. It's also very super useful for in the field if you need to jet out a lot of photos immediately after you shoot them on the go in the to your client or agency, and you don't have time to go to your laptop, download your images, and post-process them. You can actually let picture control take over, and it will stylize your JPEGs for you, so you can actually send them directly off your camera to your agency or client. Now, the different features, multiple exposure, HDR, and time lapses, they are also capable of outputting individual RAW files, but at the same time, they can output individual JPEG final output JPEG files, which use the picture control settings. So this is what I wanted to focus to you on in this section. And keep in mind that with picture control, you have various presets available, but you can also change those presets to your own liking. So you can actually change the saturation, lighting, shadows, sharpness, and so on and so forth, so you can have your own style to your JPEGs. So as an example here, I went to Niagara Falls, and here's a beautiful picture of a 3-photo multiple exposure using add as the blending mode. Picture control, I had set it to landscape mode, so sharpening of +4, mid-range sharpening of +2, and a clarity of +1. So essentially, these were, I believe, about 2-second individual exposures. The camera basically takes anywhere from 2 to 10 shots, and in this case, I took 3 shots at 2 seconds each. You have the blending mode of add, lighten, darken, or average, and then it will add the picture control settings to create that final straight out of JPEG image that I just showed you. Beautiful image of a long exposure of Niagara Falls with the moonlight on the top there. And this is something that I'd just be happy to send out right directly from the camera. Moving on to HDR mode again, very underutilized feature I would believe in the camera, and this will basically take two photos for you. This was a normal blending mode with a picture control of landscape. Again, this is straight out of the camera JPEG. No post processing done on the computer. Beautiful image of a waterfall with a long exposure. You can see there. So what HDR does is it takes two shots, one exposed for the shadow areas, one exposed for the highlight areas, and then you have your high, medium, and low HDR blending mode settings, as well as your smoothing settings within your camera. And then basically you have your picture control settings right on the right hand side. So very convenient, whether you're doing landscapes like this or out on the field at events, it will come in handy for sure. Here I have a basically star trail image. It's a 10-minute in-camera stacked image. So what I did in this case was basically I took 10 pictures, each picture is at 60-second long, multiple exposures, and I used the average blending mode in the camera with the picture control of vivid. So all this was actually done within the camera. This picture you see here is actually straight out of the camera JPEG, no editing done in Photoshop or Lightroom or anything else. This again, each picture I did was 60 seconds long, but I could have actually extended that to 90 seconds, maybe 120 seconds. For as long as you want it to carry. And I did 10 of those, and the camera was able to stack all of them using the various blending modes. And then now you see the the star trails like you wouldn't see in other pictures that you see in astrophotography images. So really convenient, super impressed that I was actually able to come out with something as beautiful as this right inside the camera. So 8K time-lapse. Now I wanted to play around with time-lapse mode since I was doing a lot of long exposures and astrophotography up in Algonquin Park. So at the time when I went, the Milky Way was out there, as well as the Perseus meteor shower. So I wanted to try and photograph that as much as I could. So let's see what this time-lapse came. Look at all those. Some of those are meteors, some of those are satellites, and some of those are airplanes. But beautiful. Again, this is at night, and so the camera had no issues trying to focus, whether I wanted to focus on the trees on the horizon or the stars out in the open in the sky there. And again, this was the in-camera time-lapse. No more editing done, no post-processing editing done whatsoever. This is what came right out of the camera. Super impressive indeed. So this raw file at 8,256 by 5,504 pixels. This image that I have in the back here, was basically one of the raw files that I used from that time lapse. It was about 550 raw images that I took over a span of maybe about an hour and a half or so, I believe. And so that's the Milky Way there. It is touched up ever so lightly in Nikon's NX Studio. And you can see, I believe that's like an airplane flying by there on the right hand side there. So again, super impressive. Using another time-lapse third-party application, I was able to create this additional time-lapse here, which I thought was pretty cool. It basically averages out each raw image and makes it into this comet-like time-lapse mode here. So you can actually see the stars moving in that direction, and the planes and the comets flying about in that time lapse as well. Super cool that you can do all of this with your raw files. Now we move on to video at 4K 120 frames per second. The Z9 is capable of doing 8K video right in the camera itself, but I wanted to try and focus a little bit more on the 120 frames per second video because the slow motion is just super smooth, super buttery smooth, and it was just very impressive. So here again, out on the kayak, maybe I was about 30-40 feet away, and let's see this heron basically hunting for food. It sees something in the water there, and it stealthily basically times itself and basically tries to spear the fish from the water and captures it within its long beak. And then it shakes its head, trying to dry out the water, and tries to reposition the fish so that it's a lot easier to swallow for the heron. And it's so great that you can actually see this in slow motion. Once he swallows it, you can actually see the fish still moving in his throat as it goes down the throat, which is pretty exciting to see. So here it is, trying to position it again, and it will swallow it whole, just like that. So again, slow motion, super smooth. Very impressed that I can actually get this kind of footage at 4K resolution, and it's definitely something of use for all the videographers out there as well. So now we move on to this particular mode called C120. Now this is at a mind-boggling 120 frames per second at this resolution, 4128 by 2752 pixels of JPEG normal mode. So I can't even think of 120 frames per second, but it was crazy when I first held the shutter down. Again, I was in silent mode because I was shooting birds and wildlife before that, and I didn't realize that I was actually taking pictures because I didn't hear the shutter button. So I just kept on holding the shutter button down, and to my realization that all this time that I held the shutter button down, it was taking 120 frames per second. So I had, at the end of that, so many JPEGs of birds flying about randomly. So I basically stitched maybe about 2 seconds worth of video here. This first video of all these birds flying about in front of the Toronto skyline. I was basically panning the camera as the birds were flying about. And in the second video that you'll see, I had the camera stationary while the birds were flying about. And again, 120 frames a second. So these birds are flying very slowly, not at full speed, but you can see how smooth they are going. And right here, especially the wing movement is so smooth at 120 frames per second. It's amazing that I can actually get these JPEGs at that resolution of 4500 pixels, which I believe is about 10-11 megapixels if you do the math. So super impressed with that, and no doubt very handy in terms of getting that decisive moment for those photographers out there in the field who need that one split-second shot, whether you're doing sports or wildlife or whatnot. And finally here, I seem to have spent a lot of time with the great blue heron, so I thought I'd do a little bit something a little bit different with the great blue heron footage that I had managed to get. All of these features that I listed here came in handy with me shooting the great blue heron out in the field. Silent photography, definitely when you're doing wildlife, so you don't disturb the wildlife with your shutter clicks. Burst mode for capturing that decisive moment for when it's flying out of the water or catching the fish. Four-way tilting LCD screen. Now, this is something that I'd never mentioned before, but something actually something I had asked for since the Z7 II came out, and so I'm super happy that Nikon put this in the Z9. Thank you so much for that. Basically, what it means is the LCD screen tilts 90 degrees up in landscape mode, and it also tilts 90 degrees up when you're in portrait mode shooting with the grip, the vertical grip. So basically it does tilt four ways: up, down, left, and right. So definitely a very helpful feature in the Z9 that I am very excited about. Again, low light scenarios using high ISO. Some of the videos that I actually took was at sunset when the sun was going down, so my ISO levels were high up, maybe about 1600 or so at some points. Again, the various autofocus modes using the animal detection, eye detection, and again 8K and 4K 120 frames per second of video recording. So to demonstrate a little bit of the recording features and maybe a little bit of creativity, I'm hoping that I can inspire you within. I did something a little bit different here. So what you see here, pretend the image that in the background that you see is at 4K resolution. So this green outline you see here will be at 1080p full HD resolution. That's 1920 or 1920 by 1080 pixels wide. So you can imagine how if I've taken a video footage of 4K and I'm using full HD as my final output size, I can actually pan my HD canvas size anywhere within that 4K footage, and I can still use that 1080p output without any loss in video quality. So that's quite amazing. That's actually super useful. And something that I'm sure a lot of videographers would find useful as well. Not to mention, when you do 8K, you're actually allowing yourself to be able to pan a lot more in 1080p mode. And if you shoot in 8K, then obviously if your final output is 4K, you can actually pan within your 8K mode. 8K video footage as well without the loss of video quality. So in this case, I can actually pan my video and even zoom in and out of the video itself without losing any image quality of the video itself. So what I did with this great blue heron segment is I took a look at some of the slow motion video that I had captured with the Z9. I stitched it up together into a little bit of a documentary per se. So let's take a look at this very short 1-minute documentary on this great blue heron. The largest of heron species in North America, these birds can get as large as 3 to 5 feet in height, and with a wingspan of up to 6 feet, they are quick, sharp-eyed, and great hunters that hunt for prey in marshland areas as they walk through water with their thin legs without disturbing their prey. Their long and flexible neck allows them to maneuver quickly as they hunt and catch or pierce their prey in the water in a matter of seconds. Herons' eyes are also unique in that they are known to contain UV receiving cones, allowing them to see colors that humans cannot see. This proves helpful when hunting and looking for mates. All of these traits and more make the great blue heron one truly unique species of birds that we in North America are fortunate enough to see and photograph. So, there we have it. I hope that I was able to present to you in a very different but creative manner in terms of how you can utilize the many features of the Z9 and explore the creativity. Basically, the creativity in the Z9, the sky's the limit. Because it's capable of so many things. It is by far the most versatile Z camera that Nikon has ever produced. And anything that I threw at it, it was totally capable of handling it with ease. And I close off this presentation with one of my favorite things to do, which is the Toronto skyline at sunrise. And again, low light focusing was not an issue at the moment. At that moment, at pre-dawn hours, beautiful color rendition, shadow details are still there, and it was just amazing to be able to use the Z9, the pre-production copy of the Z9, and I thank Nikon Canada for providing me with this opportunity, and hopefully what I came out with has inspired you to think about the Z9 camera in a different way than maybe you have originally thought of. So thanks so much. My website's there and my social media contacts are there. If any of you want to get in touch with me, feel free to let me know and I'll be happy to chat with you afterwards. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.